Most nights on the 93, my only company was Jackrabbit Eyeshine and the occasional long-haul trucker drifting 6 inches over the center line. I'd been working graveyard patrol out of the Apex substation for 5 months, a voluntary transfer my sergeant called a lateral demotion, and I called necessary distance. The shooting review board in Metro had cleared me of everything except the politics that followed, and rather than sit in a patrol room with men who had already decided what kind of cop I was, I'd requested the desert. Highway enforcement, rural corridor, 12-hour nights. The empty dark suited me fine. I was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 112, running plates on a flatbed that had passed doing 86, when dispatch patched through something unusual. A Department of Energy convoy was staging at mile 117, northbound. I was to rendezvous, assume lead escort position, and maintain formation to the Nye County line. The assignment came with a code designation I didn't recognize and instructions to switch to an encrypted channel the convoy commander would provide. I asked dispatch for a manifest or cargo summary. She told me the assignment was classified and the convoy commander would brief me on arrival. 5 miles north, I found them idling on the shoulder with their running lights on. 4 vehicles in tight formation. 2 heavy flatbed trucks, each carrying a steel pressure cylinder the size of a small industrial boiler, bolted to the bed with stanchions thick as bridge supports and banded with reinforcement straps. Behind them sat an armoured communications vehicle, a modified Suburban bristling with antenna arrays, and a black DOE security SUV at the rear. Armed men in unmarked tactical vests stood at intervals along the convoy. They watched me pull in. None of them waved. I stepped out and a man from the security SUV approached. He handed me a laminated frequency card without introducing himself. Maintain 65, no stops, no open channel traffic. Stay on this frequency. We'll handle the rest. What am I escorting? Classified cargo under Federal Transport Authority. Your role is traffic clearance and highway safety. I looked past him at the cylinders on the flatbeds. The night air was 91 degrees. Both tanks were frosted with condensation, sweating ice water down the steel walls and dripping off the stanchion bolts. Whatever cooling system kept them cold was working hard. I could hear the compressors from 30 yards away. Relief valves on the tank crowns vented thin jets of white vapor that dissolved above the trucks like breath in winter. I took the frequency card and walked back to my cruiser. The convoy rolled north at 65, and I held the lead position 200 yards ahead, lights on, clearing the lane. Sparse traffic, a couple of sedans, 1 tanker truck, pulled right and let us pass. The encrypted channel carried mostly dead air. Every few minutes a voice in the convoy called out a temperature reading in Celsius, and someone else acknowledged with a single word. Once, I caught the tail end of a sentence. Specimen compliance is nominal. Keep the drip rate at... Before the channel clicked to a different speaker and the conversation died. 12 minutes into the escort, the lead flatbed's tank moved. I saw it in my mirrors. The cylinder rocked sideways on its stanchions, a heavy, sudden lurch that didn't match the road surface. The truck's suspension dipped and recovered. I keyed the encrypted frequency and asked if they had a cargo shift. 10 seconds passed. Then, negative, maintain speed. The tank rocked again. This time the motion was rhythmic. Something inside was striking the wall. 3 impacts, evenly spaced, hard enough to make the stanchion bolts groan. The flatbed driver drifted toward the shoulder, corrected too sharply, and settled back into formation. In my mirrors, the DOE guards in the SUV leaned forward, watching the same thing. The impacts stopped. The channel stayed quiet. The convoy held formation. I kept the lead, and we drove north into 30 miles of empty highway. The stars hard and white above the desert, the compressors keeping those tanks cold. I thought about what specimen compliance meant and decided the answer could stay classified. The blowout happened at mile 132. The lead flatbed's front left tire came apart. a sudden violent shredding that sent rubber fragments spraying across the lane. The truck swerved hard right. The driver overcorrected, and the whole rig, cab, flatbed, pressure tank and all, jackknifed off the shoulder and rolled down the shallow ravine on the east side of the highway. The crash was enormous. Metal shrieked across hardpan. The truck came to rest on its side 40 feet below the road surface, dust billowing up through my headlights. The second flatbed locked its brakes and stopped across both lanes. The communications vehicle and the DOE SUV came in hard behind it, boxing the wreck site inside a wall of government steel. My cruiser was 200 yards north. I had already pulled over and angled onto the shoulder before running back toward the crash. I was calling dispatch before I reached the ravine. Static answered. My phone showed 0 signal. My cruiser's data terminal displayed a connection error. Behind me, the convoy's communications vehicle sat with its antenna array running, broadcasting something that had killed every frequency I could reach. I grabbed my flashlight and first aid kit and went down the ravine. The overturned truck lay on its passenger side, the cab crushed against a sandstone ledge, wheels still turning. The flatbed had separated partially from the fifth wheel, and the pressure tank had broken free of 2 of its 4 stanchion mounts. The tank had split on impact, a longitudinal rupture opening the cylinder like a burst pipe. Coolant flooded the sand around it, pooling in the wash, hissing where it met warm stone. Steam rose off the liquid in thick, rolling sheets. I put my flashlight on the interior of the tank. The inner walls were gouged with deep parallel grooves, 4 tracks each, carved into steel that had to be 2 inches thick. Claw marks. Hundreds of them layered over each other, some old enough to show corrosion at the edges, some bright and fresh. The scoring ran the full interior length of the tank. Whatever had been inside had spent a long time trying to get out. The tank was empty. Above me on the highway, DOE guards called positions and names. A voice I hadn't heard before, rough, commanding, issued tactical orders in the middle of a wreck scene. A sound came from the desert east of the ravine, something large moving over loose ground, rocks displaced, a footfall heavy enough to feel through the sand under my boots. I pulled my sidearm, which felt about as useful as a thrown rock, and started climbing back up the slope. The driver's cries reached me before I reached the road. A man in the overturned cab, pinned somewhere in the crushed compartment, was calling for help in a voice torn ragged with pain. I could see the cab's underside from the ravine slope. The windshield had buckled but held. The passenger door was flat against the ground. The driver's door had warped shut above him, and the only way in was through the rear window, which had shattered on impact and left a gap just wide enough for a man to crawl through. I went in. The flashlight showed me the driver, a heavy-set man in a DOE contractor jacket, name tape reading Fitch, wedged at the waist between the collapsed dashboard and the steering column. His legs were somewhere underneath the wreckage. He was conscious, breathing in short, high bursts, gripping the headliner above him with both hands. "I'm Nevada Highway Patrol," I told him. "I'm going to get you out. Can you feel your legs?" "One of them." His face was white and sheeted with sweat. "The other one's gone numb. Something's on my hip. I can't push it off." I found his tire iron wedged under the seat frame, grabbed it, and started working on the dashboard console, pinning his pelvis. The metal groaned when I levered it. Fitch groaned louder. I got maybe 3 inches of clearance and braced the iron against the doorframe to hold it. The first impact hit the driver's side door above us. The entire cab frame shuddered. A section of the upper door panel, now our ceiling since the truck was on its side, bowed inward 6 inches, the metal deforming like it had been struck with a battering ram. Fitch held his breath. I stopped moving. The second blow came 2 seconds later. The upper door panel dented further. A structural rib cracked and the panel dropped another 3 inches, close enough now that I could have reached up and touched the depression. The third blow punched a seam open. A narrow split in the door metal let in a sliver of desert starlight and a sound like heavy plates grinding over each other, like stone slabs being shuffled. I grabbed Fitch under the arms and pulled. Pain tore a raw sound out of him. The dashboard still had his left leg. I wedged the tire iron deeper, threw my weight against it, and the console shifted just enough for me to drag him free. His left leg came out at an angle that meant a fractured pelvis or worse. Above us, the split in the roof tore wider as something gripped the edges and peeled the metal apart. I saw the limb that did it. An arm, if you could call it that, as thick as my torso, plated in dark, segmented material that shifted and flexed as it moved. Each plate was the size of a dinner plate, sliding over the next with that grinding sound, opening and closing like the segments of an insect's carapace. The limb reached into the gap it had made and swept sideways, tearing away a 3-foot section of roof. Cool night air flooded the cab. I dragged Fitch backward through the broken rear window. His leg caught on the frame and he made a choked sound, air forced through a closed throat. I pulled until he came free and we slid down the truck's underside onto the sand. Above us, inside the cab, the roof collapsed completely where we'd been lying 4 seconds earlier. The limb withdrew. I got Fitch over my shoulder in a carry that was going to damage his leg further, and I didn't have a choice. I climbed the ravine slope half bent, boots sliding on loose rock, Fitch's weight driving me into the hillside with every step. The highway shoulder appeared above me. I dragged us both up the last 3 feet and onto the asphalt. One of the DOE guards was running toward the communications vehicle, 40 yards away, rifle at his chest. He was sprinting flat out. Something dropped from above and took him. The motion was so fast and so vertical that it took me a full second to understand what I'd seen. The guard's feet left the ground and his body accelerated upward into the dark. Gone. The rifle hit the pavement in 2 pieces, broken at the magazine well. The man's boots had left scrape marks on the asphalt, 2 parallel drag lines that ended abruptly. Blood, a wide arterial spray, fanned across a distance marker sign 8 feet above the road surface. The remaining guards opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the desert in strobe bursts. In those flashes, I saw something standing on top of the communications vehicle. Massive, hunched, turning its head toward the gunfire. Then the flashes stopped. Darkness took the road again, and a man's cry south of my position cut off in a wet snap. I dragged Fitch behind the engine block of the second flatbed. It was the nearest solid cover left. My cruiser was still north up the highway, useless to him unless I could carry him there, and every instinct in my body told me that crossing open road would get us both killed. I drew my weapon and waited for my eyes to readjust. A cold arithmetic bypassed panic. My 9mm sidearm was going to do absolutely nothing to whatever had just peeled a truck cab apart with one hand. "Put the weapon away. You'll make yourself a target." The voice came from my right. A man walked out of the dark, stocky, mid-40s, wearing the same unmarked tactical vest as the dead guards. His left eye was still there but ruined, the iris a solid dead white, the skin around it puckered and taut with old burn scarring that extended from eyebrow to cheekbone. His good eye, the right one, was fixed on the darkness beyond the convoy, with the kind of attention that came from having been hurt by what he was watching for. Sergeant Frank Henderson, DOE Retrieval Section. He didn't offer a hand. "How many you got left?" "The driver. He's behind the flatbed, broken pelvis, maybe worse. I need to call for medical evac. My radio's jammed." "Everything's jammed. The comm vehicle is running a wideband suppression field. It's part of the transport protocol." "Then shut it off." "Can't do that. 2 of your men are dead. I've got a man with a crushed pelvis. I need an ambulance and backup, and you're telling me your own communications vehicle is the reason I can't call for either one." Henderson's good eye tracked a sound somewhere east of the road. He watched the dark for 5 seconds before he answered. "That vehicle's suppression field is keeping this off every scanner, every ham radio, every newsroom frequency in southern Nevada. We lost containment on a classified federal asset. My orders are to maintain information security until a retrieval team arrives. Your radio stays dead until then. How does a retrieval team arrive if you can't call one? The convoy was due at the Nye County handoff point at 0200. When we miss it, they'll send a team to our last GPS ping. Estimated arrival 90 minutes to 2 hours. I looked at the blood on the road sign, the boot scrapes, the broken rifle. What was in that tank, Sergeant? He watched the dark a moment longer. Then he turned to me with both eyes, the good one sharp and focused, the dead one catching the road flare light and throwing it back like a coin. A live non-human specimen captured 18 months ago at a recovery site I'm not authorized to name. It's been transported 4 times. This is the 5th. I've been on every transport since the second one, which is where I got this. He touched the skin below his dead eye without looking away from me. Cold keeps it slow. Cold keeps the armor sealed. We had another way to control it too. An implant, a kind of override. That control may still be functional. The hardware's in the SUV. But the SUV is 60 yards south, past open road in the dark, and getting to it means crossing ground that thing is circling. Another sound from the desert, closer, a weight settling on sand, a low grinding of plates. Henderson turned toward it and rested his hand on his sidearm without drawing. He listened with his whole body, leaning slightly toward the sound, the way a man leans towards something he hates and cannot stop watching. "It knows my voice," he said. "It heard me on the second breach. Saw my face through the gap before the implant dropped it. I've been on every transport since because I'm the only handler it responds to with consistency." He paused. "Responds to? That's the official language. What it actually does when it hears me is get angry." Fitch groaned behind the flatbed. Somewhere in the dark, metal scraped against stone. "I have 2 guards left," Henderson said. "Gutierrez, who was driving the second flatbed, and Lance. They're holding position by the second truck. The cargo in that tank is still sealed and cold. We hold the road, we wait for retrieval, and we do not leave this perimeter for any reason." "And the thing out there?" "It's been in a pressurized container at 4 degrees Celsius for 14 hours. Now it's loose in open desert and warming by the minute." Henderson checked his sidearm, a gesture of habit, not confidence. "Stay close to the vehicles. Keep your light off unless you need it. And if anyone starts running, tackle them before that thing does." We formed something closer to a cluster than a perimeter. Henderson's 2 remaining guards, Gutierrez and Lance, both young, both shaken in ways they were working hard to keep off their faces, took positions at the front and rear of the second flatbed. The truck's pressure tank was intact, its compressors still running, frost still forming on the steel. Whatever was inside that one stayed quiet. Fitch lay on a survival blanket under the flatbed's shadow, with his fractured leg splintered using a rifle stock and medical tape from the SUV's kit. He drifted in and out of consciousness, which counted as a mercy. I stood with Henderson near the communications vehicle and argued, one more time for killing the jammer. Every minute that field is running is a minute I can't get this man to a hospital. Every minute that field is running is a minute this doesn't end up on cable news by sunrise. Henderson watched the desert while he said it. The DOE's position is that information containment takes priority over individual casualties. I don't like it either, but that's the operating framework, and I don't have the authority to override it. You don't have the authority to override a jammer in a truck you're standing next to. I don't have the authority to make that call. He meant it. The distinction mattered to him. He wasn't hiding behind orders. He was genuinely bound by them, the way a man is bound by a procedure he's followed through worse situations than this one, and can't abandon now, because abandoning it means admitting those worse situations were handled wrong too. I saw it in his face. Henderson had survived 3 encounters with something that had killed better men, and the only way he'd survived was by following the protocol exactly. The protocol was the only structure he had left. I stopped arguing. Henderson distributed road flares, and we lit a rough circle around the vehicles. Red chemical light pooled across the asphalt and threw long shadows into the ravine. The desert beyond the shoulder stayed black. The creature came at 10 minutes past 1. It walked out of the dark east of the highway and stopped at the edge of the flare light. I saw it full and whole for the first time. It stood taller than the flatbed truck beside it. 12 feet, maybe 13, hard to gauge against the vehicle's profile, but its head cleared the top of the pressure tank by 2 feet. Its body was plated in dark, segmented armor from crown to ground, each plate the size of a serving tray, overlapping and interlocking in a pattern that covered every visible surface. The plates moved. They flexed open and shut in a slow, rhythmic cycle, separating at the edges to show dark membranes underneath, then closing again. The whole body surface was breathing. The motion was autonomous, involuntary, like a man's ribs expanding. The plates rose and fell with a cadence that had everything to do with what it was. It watched us. 2 eyes, or what served as eyes, sat deep in a head, wider than a man's chest. They caught the flare light and held it. The creature stood in the chemical red wash, motionless and intent, studying the 5 of us the way a man studies a locked door when he already knows where the key is. Gutierrez shifted his rifle. Lance breathed through his teeth. Henderson stood absolutely still, his ruined eye reflecting the flare light, his good eye locked on the creature. I kept my hand off my sidearm because Henderson had told me to, and because I believed him. The creature stood there for 30 seconds, then a minute, then Lance broke. It happened quietly. He took 3 steps backward from his position at the truck's rear bumper, and his breathing changed, fast, shallow, the kind of breathing a man can't control when his body overrides his training. He brought his rifle up and kept backing away, each step a little quicker than the last. The creature crossed 40 yards in 2 strides. The speed was wrong for its size. Nothing that heavy should accelerate that fast. It covered the distance between the flare perimeter and Lance's position in less time than it took me to turn my head. Lance fired once. The round hit the creature's chest plates and sparked off into the desert. Then the creature had him, and Lance vanished into a short, wet sound that ended with a crack carrying across the empty highway like a branch breaking. Nobody moved. Gutierrez trained his rifle on the dark, where the creature had vanished, his whole body rigid with the effort of staying in place. I stood by the communications vehicle with my hand on the hood, feet planted, every nerve in my leg screaming at me to run north to my cruiser until I couldn't run anymore. The creature left the rest of us alive. I stood there in the flare light and put together what I'd seen. The guard on the highway, sprinting and panicked, taken instantly. Lance, backing away and losing control, taken. The rest of us, still and afraid but holding position, spared. Twice now the creature had come close enough to take any of us. Twice it had selected the one moving fastest, breathing hardest, losing composure. Henderson confirmed it without me asking. He told Gutierrez, "Hold position, stay steady. It wants runners." Gutierrez nodded once. In the road flare light, I could see his knuckles had gone white on the rifle grip. He was holding his position through an act of will that was costing him everything he had. 3 dead. Fitch immobile. Gutierrez halfway to useless. Henderson locked in a staring contest with something in the desert that he was convinced hated him by name. My cruiser 200 yards north past open road, in the dark, its radio dead as long as the jammer ran. I stayed where I was. I kept still. I breathed through it and waited for whatever came next, trying not to think about the creature's ability to tell the difference between a man standing his ground and a man about to break. The distance between those 2 things was shrinking inside my chest with every minute the flares burned lower. Headlights appeared on the highway a mile south. I saw them first, 2 warm points crawling up the grade past mile 129, growing brighter as they closed. A large vehicle riding high, moving at highway speed. Civilian. I checked my watch. 1:37 in the morning. The 93 ran light at this hour, but it remained open. We had no barricade, no detour signs, nothing to warn a driver away from the blackout zone except flares on the shoulder that looked like a construction project or a routine accident. Henderson saw the headlights 2 seconds after I did and said, Stop them! I was already moving, walking, controlled, toward the northbound lane. The vehicle resolved as it drew closer, a recreational vehicle, full-sized, older model Class A with Arizona plates and a roof-mounted antenna cluster that included, I noticed as it slowed, a CB whip and a police scanner mount. The RV's brakes engaged, and it pulled to the shoulder 50 yards south of our position. I reached the driver's window with my flashlight angled down and my badge visible. Nevada Highway Patrol, I need you to turn around and head south. The road is closed ahead. The driver was a man in his mid-60s with a sunburned scalp, wire-rimmed glasses, and the undisturbed face that comes from decades of government desk work. He studied my badge, the blood on my uniform shirt, then the flares, the overturned truck in the ravine, and the armed men by the flatbed. How far back is the detour? There's no detour set up yet. I need you to reverse direction and proceed south to the apex junction. You can take the 95 north from there. A woman leaned across from the passenger seat, his wife, close to his age, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at the DOE vehicles, the armed guards, and the communications truck with its antenna array still running. Those are federal markings, she said. What did they lose? The man extended a hand through the window. Wes Krem, this is Joni. We've been getting nothing on the scanner for the last 15 miles. I thought it was atmospheric, but that's a suppression array, isn't it? He nodded toward the communications vehicle. We did 22 years with the Postal Inspection Service. I know what a federal containment scene looks like. Joni Krem pointed at my shirt. Whose blood is that, officer? I had about 3 seconds to decide what to tell them. The truth was impossible. A partial lie was the best I could manage. There's been an accident involving hazardous cargo. The road's shut down in both directions until the scene is clear. I need you to stay with your vehicle. Wes accepted that for roughly the time it took Henderson to appear at my shoulder. Henderson looked at the Krems the way a man looks at a complication he'd been trained to prevent, and told me, quietly, "Get them into the comm vehicle. They're witnesses to a classified federal operation. They're civilians on a public highway. They're inside a containment perimeter. Because you won't let them leave." We were arguing in low voices beside the RV while Joni watched us through the window with an expression that said she'd heard every word. Wes had already shifted into park and was reaching for something in the center console. His wallet, I realized. He pulled out a retired federal credentials card and held it where Henderson could see it. Postal Inspection Service, 30 years, Wes said. I've worked joint cases. I know what need to know means, Sergeant. I also know that locking 2 retirees in the back of a government truck at 2 in the morning on a public highway creates the kind of paperwork that outlives careers. Henderson stared at the credential card. Something moved beyond the south shoulder. It wasn't close, but it was close enough to hear, a shift of weight in sand. The RV idled low, its engine block ticking heat into the night, its white side panels bright under the flare wash. A large moving box full of panicked people would only give the creature something bigger to hit. I looked at Wes. Kill the engine. Cut the headlights. Move slowly. He did it without asking why. Henderson turned to me. Keep them close. They stay with the vehicles, they stay quiet, and when retrieval gets here, they sign whatever they're told to sign. He walked back toward the flatbed. Joni climbed down from the RV and Wes followed, and the 3 of us stood on the highway shoulder in the flare light while I tried to figure out how to keep 2 retired postal inspectors alive in a place I couldn't explain to them. He's the one running this? Wes asked, watching Henderson's back. He's the ranking DOE officer on site. Wes watched Henderson check the dark before he checked the injured man. He's terrified of it. He knows what's out there. Something moved in the desert east of the road, a heavy shift, then a low grinding of plates against each other, far enough out that I couldn't see it, but close enough that the sound carried clean across the sand. Joni looked toward the sound. Wes put a hand on her arm, and she stayed where she was. Her eyes found mine. What's out there? I told them enough. A federal transport specimen had breached containment. It was large, extremely dangerous, and hunting by panic and movement. People who ran died fast. People who held still had a chance. Their best chance of surviving the next hour was to stay calm, stay close to the vehicles, and move slowly if they had to move at all. Wes listened. He nodded once when I finished, went to the RV's exterior storage compartment, and came back with a locked gun case. He opened it on the RV's step. Inside was a competition pistol, a Smith & Wesson in .40 caliber, with 2 spare magazines. He loaded it and put the spare mags in his jacket pocket. "I shot bullseye for 30 years, he said. "Whatever's out there, I'm guessing this won't kill it." A rifle round bounced off its chest. "Then I'll aim for whatever isn't armored, if it comes to that." "Wes," Joni said, quiet. "This isn't Perry." "No," he said. "It isn't." She went to Fitch instead of watching the desert. She knelt beside him, took his wrist between 2 fingers, and lowered her face close to his. "Mr. Fitch, breathe with me, slow as you can. In through your nose if you can manage it." Fitch's breathing hitched, then followed her voice by half a beat. It was the first useful thing anyone had done for him in 10 minutes. Wes closed the gun case. "What's your plan for getting us out of here, trooper?" I looked north up the highway toward my cruiser, 200 yards away in the dark. Then I looked at the DOE security SUV, parked 30 yards south, its doors still open from when Henderson had retrieved his gear. I had the beginning of an idea. The SUV's cargo bay held equipment cases marked with DOE inventory tags. I found what I was looking for in the third case, a rack of military-grade thermal decoy flares, the kind designed to confuse heat-seeking tracking systems. Each one burned at over 1,000 degrees for 60 seconds, throwing a massive infrared signature. My plan was simple. Deploy the thermal flares in a line east into the desert, away from the highway and away from the group. The creature had been circling east all night. If it tracked heat, the flares would draw it out and keep it occupied while we moved north to my cruiser. The cruiser's radio operated on a different frequency band. At close range, it might punch through the jammer, or I could drive south out of the suppression field and reach dispatch. I told Henderson. He looked at the flares and said, "It won't draw it off. You know that. I know it won't track them the way you want." He watched the dark, weighing something behind that ruined eye. "But they might make it show itself." "That's not the same thing." "No." He looked toward the DOE SUV. "I need it close." "For what?" He didn't answer. After a moment he said, "Try it." I carried the flare rack to the east shoulder and deployed 6 thermal decoys in a staggered line, 30 yards apart, stretching out into the desert wash. The flares ignited in sequence, brilliant white-hot points that threw heat plumes into the distorted air above them. 6 artificial targets, each burning hotter than a vehicle engine, brighter than anything else in the desert. The creature appeared. 100 yards east, it stood in the open sand beyond the last flare, motionless, facing the line of burning decoys. Its armor plates flexed in that slow breathing rhythm, and its head tracked along the flare line from south to north. It watched the flares burn. Then it turned away from them and walked toward the highway. The thermal decoys meant nothing to it. 1,000 degrees of radiant heat, and the creature treated the flares like a television playing in an empty room, registered, dismissed, irrelevant. I watched it circle north of our position, passing through the gap between the flare perimeter and the desert dark, and I understood what Henderson already knew. The creature was reading panic. It tracked the guards who lost control and ignored the people who held still. The thermal flares burned hotter than any living thing on that highway, and the creature walked past them without interest. It was sensing breath, sweat, movement, whatever chemistry fear forced through the skin when a person stopped being a person and became an alarm. A still target might be terrified, but a still target was quiet. A running target was a siren. Every guard who died tonight had died moving, panicking, broadcasting terror through every pore. The ones who survived had survived by keeping enough of themselves locked down. I looked at the 6 thermal flares burning uselessly in the desert and felt something tighten between my shoulder blades. I could control my feet. I could force myself to walk instead of run. But controlling fear, real fear, the kind that lives below thought and gets to the blood before the mind can vote, was a different thing entirely. Every person in our group was afraid. Every one of us was a signal source. The only question was, who would burn brightest first? Henderson was standing by the SUV when I came back to the vehicles. He had something in his hand, a ruggedized device the size of a brick, antenna stub protruding from one end, a single recessed control switch on its face. He held it the way a man holds a weapon he's used before and isn't sure he trusts. "Implant beacon controller," he said. "The Specimen has a neural override wired into its motor cortex. When I activate this, the implant fires a pain response strong enough to lock every voluntary muscle in its body. It drops. Full seizure. Lasts about 90 seconds before the tissue adapts." He turned the device over in his hand. It worked on the 2nd transport. It worked on the 3rd. I've been carrying this since the breach, and I didn't use it earlier because the range is limited. "How close?" 60 yards or less. "And it's close." He activated the beacon. Somewhere in the desert east of the highway, the creature collapsed. I heard it. A massive impact on sand, then a grinding, thrashing sound as something enormous convulsed against the ground. Armor plates struck rock, limbs hammered earth, sand sprayed up in a plume visible against the stars. The convulsions were violent and total, the body locked in a seizure that drove it into the desert floor like a machine shaking itself apart. Henderson watched. The device in his hand transmitted its signal, and the creature seized. Henderson's face held an expression I recognized from men I'd arrested, men who had waited a long time to see someone who hurt them suffer. Satisfaction, control, the restoration of a power dynamic inverted by violence, set right by violence in return. Then the creature reached one armored limb across its own torso and dug in. It tore into its own chest. The limb punched through the armor plating at the sternum, cracking the plates apart and driving through the membrane underneath. The convulsions continued. The creature was seizing and self-operating at the same time, its arm working inside its own chest, while the rest of its body spasmed against the sand. I heard tissue separating. I heard something wet pull free. The creature's arm withdrew, holding a fist-sized mass trailing filaments of dark biological material. It dropped the mass on the sand. The convulsions stopped. The beacon controller in Henderson's hand was still transmitting. The light on its face blinked steadily. The creature stood up. It rose to its full height, chest torn open where it had operated on itself, and the damaged armor began to separate. The chest plates split along their seams and fell, heavy slabs of dark material that hit the sand like wet masonry, steaming where they landed. More plates dropped from its shoulders, its flanks, its upper limbs. The creature was shedding its armor, stripping it away in sections, and underneath each fallen plate was something pale and raw and alive. Sensory organs. Membranous structures, each the size of a spread hand, bloomed outward from the exposed tissue like satellite dishes orienting toward a signal. They were translucent, veined with dark capillaries, and they moved, swiveling independently, tracking stimulus, opening wider as they locked on. My flashlight beam crossed the creature's torso, and every exposed organ turned toward it simultaneously, spreading wide, drinking the light. I killed the flashlight. The organs held their orientation toward where the beam had been, then slowly began scanning, turning, tasting the air and the heat and whatever else they read from the world. The creature was lighter now, faster. The armor had been a closed state, transit protection, cold weather shell, the only way the DOE could handle it without understanding it. The organs underneath were what it hunted with. Every plate it shed made it more aware, more precisely tuned to the signals our bodies were producing. Henderson lowered the beacon controller. The transmission light still blinked. The creature stood in the desert 60 yards away, chest opened by its own hand, armor scattered in steaming piles around its feet. And the implant, the only leash the DOE had ever held, lay torn and dead on the sand. It remembered, Henderson said. His voice was flat. The satisfaction was gone. It felt the pain, and it knew where it came from. It decided it would rather tear itself apart than let me do that to it again. Gutierrez made a sound from his position at the truck. Wes Krem stood by the RV with his pistol at his side and his wife behind him. Fitch was unconscious beneath the flatbed. The creature turned its exposed sensors toward the highway and began walking toward us. We move now. I said it to all of them at once. Henderson, Gutierrez, Wes, Joni. My cruiser was 200 yards north. The distance might as well have been 2 miles, but staying on the highway was no longer a choice. The flare perimeter was burning down to stubs. The creature was unarmored, faster, and its sensory range had just expanded by an order of magnitude. Every second we stood there, our bodies advertised us. Everybody walks. Nobody runs. Keep your breathing slow, keep your steps even, stay close together. If you're calm and slow, it has trouble locking on. If you break and run, you're dead before you cover 10 yards. Joni Krem took her husband's arm. Wes holstered his pistol under his jacket and nodded once. Gutierrez slung his rifle and moved to Fitch. We got the injured driver onto a makeshift stretcher, a survival blanket doubled around Lance's abandoned rifle and a spare from the SUV, and Gutierrez took the forward end while I took the rear. Henderson stood by the communications vehicle and watched us prepare. He hadn't moved. Sergeant, we're leaving. It's pacing us. His good eye was fixed on the desert east of the road. I followed his gaze and saw the creature, 200 yards out, maybe less, paralleling the highway. Its pale sensor organs caught starlight and gave it a strange, luminous quality against the dark sand, like something phosphorescent dredged up from deep water. It was keeping pace, waiting. It's pacing because it's reading us, Henderson said. Every one of us is producing signal, fear, adrenaline, heart rate. It's sorting through the noise, looking for the loudest source, and the loudest source in this group is me. Henderson. I was on the second transport. The breach that burned my eye. It was 4 feet from me when the implant fired. I was the man holding the controller. I was the man it saw when the pain hit. He tapped the dead beacon unit against his thigh, and I just did it again. I'm carrying 18 months of its conditioning, Trooper. My body knows this thing, and this thing knows my body. I'm broadcasting on a frequency you can't hear, loud enough to keep it locked on this group for as long as I'm standing in it. He was right. I could see it. The creature's sensor organs were oriented toward our position, but the largest cluster, the ones on what remained of its chest and head, tracked Henderson specifically. They followed his movements. They adjusted when he shifted weight. Henderson's fear was old and specific and bone-deep, the kind of fear that lives in scar tissue, and the creature could read it the way a dog reads a trail. Take them north, Henderson said. He picked up the dead beacon controller and put it in his vest pocket. I'll walk east. When it follows me, you move. That's suicide. That's the mission. He looked at me with both eyes, the dead white one and the sharp brown one, and the expression on his face was something beyond fear or courage or resignation. It was recognition. He had been walking toward this since the second transport, since the breach that took his eye, since the creature saw his face through the gap in the ruptured tank and learned who caused its pain. This was always where it ended up, he said. I just thought I'd have a retrieval team behind me when it did. He turned and walked east off the highway shoulder, down the shallow grade into the desert wash, moving at a steady pace. He talked as he walked. His voice carried across the sand, low, conversational, directed at something in the dark ahead of him. He was speaking to the creature. I caught fragments, his name, his rank, dates, transport numbers. The breach on the second run. He was reciting their shared history, feeding it the sound of the man it hated, pulling its attention away from the highway like a man dragging a weight behind him. The creature's sensor organs swiveled. The largest cluster tracked Henderson's voice, then his movement, then the signal his body was throwing, the old, deep, specific fear of something that had already hurt him once and was about to do it again. It followed him. I watched it go, a massive pale shape moving east into the desert, accelerating, closing the distance to a man walking alone into the sand. Then I turned to the group and said, "Walk, stay together, stay slow." We walked north. Gutierrez and I carried Fitch. Wes held Joni's arm. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were boots on asphalt and Fitch's ragged breathing, and behind us, growing fainter, Henderson's voice talking to something in the dark. A sound came from the east, heavy, final. I kept walking. Gutierrez heard it too. His stride broke, half a step, his body trying to stop and turn. The stretcher shifted in his grip. I said his name once and he corrected. We kept moving. My cruiser emerged ahead, a darker shape against the pale line of the shoulder. 100 yards. 80. 60. The creature's sensor organs were gone from the east horizon. The desert was quiet. Henderson's voice had stopped. At 40 yards, Gutierrez broke. He dropped his end of the stretcher, the rifle banging against his hip, and ran, flat out sprinting for the cruiser. His boots hammered the asphalt and his breathing ripped open. I caught the stretcher before Fitch hit the ground. Wes stepped in and took Gutierrez's end without a word, and we kept walking, steady. 2 men carrying a third while a fourth ran ahead of us into the dark. Gutierrez made it. He reached the cruiser and collapsed against the driver's door, crouched and sucking air, alive. The creature was gone east, drawn away by Henderson, occupied, hunting the louder signal. Gutierrez survived his panic because someone else had already pulled the predator away. I reached the cruiser, set Fitch down on the shoulder, opened the driver's door, dropped into the seat, and keyed the radio. Static. The jammer was still running. I switched to the secondary dispatch frequency, a backup channel we used during storm interference. Lower power, different band. Hit the transmit key. Dispatch, this is Unit 714 Trooper Brooks. Emergency traffic, mile 132, US 93 northbound. Multiple casualties. Federal transport accident. DOE containment failure. I need medical evac for a code red trauma patient and Nevada Highway Patrol backup. Respond. 2 seconds of static. 3. Then dispatch came back, broken but readable. 714, copy your emergency traffic. Units en route. Confirm number of casualties. 3 confirmed dead. 1 critical, 1 missing. I paused on the word missing. Henderson wasn't missing. I knew where he'd gone, and I knew what had followed him. DOE personnel on site. Advise responding units, this is a federal scene. They'll need to coordinate with DOE retrieval on arrival. Copy 714. EMS and backup en route. Estimated 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I set the handset on the seat and sat there with the engine off and the dome light dark, and my hands on the steering wheel. The desert was silent. The highway was empty in both directions. The flares on the shoulder behind us had burned down to red stubs, and the thermal decoys in the desert wash were dark. The stars were hard and white, and close in the way they only get in Nevada, in the open basin country, when there is no light for 60 miles in any direction. Wes Krem appeared at the passenger window. He'd gotten Joni seated in the cruiser's back seat. He stood with his arms resting on the cruiser's roof and looked north up the empty highway for a while before he spoke. The DOE is going to have people here within the hour. That's right. They're going to explain to us that we didn't see anything tonight. Probably. Wes nodded. He looked south toward the convoy vehicles, the overturned truck in the ravine, the split pressure tank. Then he looked east, into the desert, where Henderson had walked. Joni was watching from the cruiser's rear window, her face faintly lit by the dashboard instruments, her eyes fixed on the same dark basin. "Your sergeant out there," Wes said. "The one with the bad eye. He's dead, isn't he?" I didn't answer. Wes didn't need me to. He tapped the cruiser's roof twice with his palm and walked back to his wife. Gutierrez sat on the asphalt beside the cruiser's rear tire with his rifle across his knees and stared at the ground between his boots. Fitch was breathing. The sealed tank on the second flatbed still ran its compressors, frost forming on steel, its cargo undisturbed. I sat in the cruiser and waited for the lights. The radio crackled with dispatch confirmations, units inbound, EMS staged, DOE notified. The highway would reopen by sunrise. The crash report would say tire failure, hazardous cargo, federal jurisdiction. The bodies would be collected. The convoy would be impounded. The classified briefings would begin. By the time the morning commuters drove this stretch of 93, there would be nothing left except tire marks on the shoulder and a scraped patch of asphalt where the road sign had been washed clean. I had seen what a clean report could do. I had seen what men in rooms could decide about a thing after the blood was gone and the paperwork had dried, cleared of everything except the truth. That was one way to live with it. In the side mirror, far out in the desert, something moved. A shape low against the sand, pale where the starlight caught it, crossing the basin floor in a direction that led away from the highway and into the empty miles east of the range. Moving fast, moving free. I reached for my cruiser's spotlight toggle and stopped. My hand rested on the switch, and I thought about Henderson's voice in the dark, reciting transport numbers to something that had learned his name. I thought about the beacon controller in his vest pocket, its signal still transmitting to an implant that lay torn and dead in the sand, 60 yards from a pile of shed armor. I left the spotlight off. I left the flashlight off. I sat in the dark, kept still, and let the desert keep its silence. Somewhere out past the range, past the basin, past everything the DOE would ever admit existed on this highway, the thing that killed Frank Henderson moved through the open country and did what it was built to do. The lights came 20 minutes later, red and blue filling the highway. I opened my door, stepped out, and waved them in. I did the work. I filed the report. At dawn, I drove home with the sun in my eyes and Fitch's blood still on my uniform, knowing the second tank was still sealed and cold. Its compressors were still running. And somewhere in a federal building I would never see, men were already planning the next transport.